Okay. All right. I'm gonna move this over here and then you guys can move it back when you're ready to go. My name is Jenna. I am the collections co-director here at the library. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And so I'm gonna kick things off here. I'll give a brief little history of our oral history collection and demo how you can actually access the oral history recordings and transcripts on our website. And then once I'm done blathering on for a little while, the more exciting part will happen and I'll let Bev take it away at that point. So this collection, we have over 150 recordings in the collection. They were started in the mid-1960s and went up through the early 2000s on and off. There were a lot of different volunteers that were involved in this project. A lot of names you probably recognize: Irene Francis, Arlie Riggs, Debbie Hood, among other people who were conducting these interviews over the years. And the earliest ones were on reel-to-reel, which I brought a couple here if you're just curious. We still have all of the old reel-to-reels. And then the bulk of them are on cassette tape, so a few of those there.
Was Jacqueline doing those?
She was involved in the digitizing. I think she did a little bit of the interviewing later on. But yeah, she
interviewed my dad, and I mean, she interviewed my dad for something, but maybe it was for the newspaper. I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think she did do some into the 2000s, but I'm not positive. So obviously, reel to reel is not the greatest media. Neither are cassette tapes. And so about a decade ago, some of the library staff and volunteers were concerned about the, life of these materials and that we were going to lose all this wonderful information because of the deteriorating media. So they applied for a grant through CRAB, the Colorado Historical Records Advisory Board, a mouthful of an acronym there, and received a grant in order to digitize all of these oral history recordings. And so like I said, that was about 10 years ago. They were all moved into MP3 files. And then last year, Bev Allen approached me about making these recordings more accessible to the public, because obviously it's great that we have these digital recordings that people can listen to, but they're still not as accessible as they could be. So Bev spearheaded a new grant through CRAB and this project to transcribe and index and summarize as many of these as she could during this grant period. And that way we could have all of that on our website so that people can see what's on these recordings without having to actually listen to, every hour and a half long recording. So we're super excited to have this all accessible now. It's up on the website, which I'm going to show to you. Any questions on that brief little, that's definitely the Cliff Notes version of the history, but it's kind of how we got to today, so. All right, well, if you are not familiar with our website, westcusterlibrary.org, if you put in our URL, this will bring you to our main page here. And then to actually get to the recordings, you want to hover over Services, and down at the bottom here, click on Local History Center. And we have various information about all of our collections there. And then the top result, which is what we want, is our oral history collection. So if you click on that link there, it's going to open up a new tab for you that's going to have all of our oral histories listed here. So we scroll down. They're all their own link here. They're in alphabetical order by the name of the interviewee. And I try to include, some pertinent information on this page. If you're interested in a certain time period, or obviously if you're looking for a certain individual, you can find that there. Some of these also are more topical. For example, there's one about the Cloverdale Mine specifically. Most of these are just kind of a general overview, people sharing about their life, their family's life story. But a few of them do have really specific subject matter. So if it has that, I did try to include that here. in case you're looking for something really specific, but most of them are, general family history and, talking about the valley and businesses in town, these kinds of things. So you can scroll through there, it's got the date on there, and it'll tell you, some of these, depending on, the audio quality might be a little more poor, so it might only have a summary or an index. So I did put that on there. If it doesn't say anything, if it just has the name and the date, that means it has all of that. It has the transcript, the index, and the summary. So, all right, let's click on one here just to show you what you're going to get if you open one up. As I said, every person has their own page here. This top link here is the actual audio recording. So that's gonna open up that MP3 file in a new tab so you can actually listen to the interview. Or if you just wanna browse what this one is about, you can scroll down. First up here is the summary. You just want that quick overview of what they discuss. And then the index, oh, this one doesn't have an index. I'll show you another one. But so this one, the next up is the full transcript. So if you'd rather read through it, you don't want to listen to it, or if you're more comfortable reading as opposed to listening, maybe you're hard of hearing, you can read through the transcript there. All right, let's see. So this one has, just to show you what that index looks like. So Bev and her volunteers went through and plugged in at what timestamp in the interview they're discussing each topic. So if you are really interested in flying school, you can go to the 23-minute mark of that particular interview and hear about that topic. So any questions on that? It's going to be on our website permanently. You can access this from home. Your cousin in England wants to listen to our oral history recordings. As long as they have internet, they can get on here and access all of this. So, all right.
And what about, you want to talk a little about the copyright issues? I mean, people want to use these in research or whatever.
Yeah, so we have this fun little statement up here. All of the recordings and everything else that Bev created do belong to the library. They're the sole property of the library, so they cannot be reproduced elsewhere without our explicit permission. Obviously, anyone is welcome to listen to them and learn from them. If you're writing a book, for example, and you want to quote from these, you need to contact the library first so that we can discuss it. So,
Jenna, what's your format for that? If I want to use quotes out of here for something historical, is it a direct contact to you, or do you have a specific one or something that you want people to use?
just shoot me an email. We'll just go with that, and then we can discuss it.
Upgrading at the museum, so we may want to pull some notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, just send me an email. All right, any other questions on that? Now we'll move into the fun part. I'll let Bev take it from here. And of course, if you ever do have any questions, feel free to give us a call, shoot us an email, whatever, and we can help you out.
So
Feel free to move that out if you want to.
okay. So you may wonder, who am I? How did I get involved with all of this? Well, up until about 5 years ago, I was the archivist at Colorado State University in Pueblo. And before that, for all 40 years of my career, I worked at various universities and historical societies, government agencies, runs the gamut. And one of my special interests in a couple of those jobs, especially at CSU Pueblo, was oral history. And my first exposure to oral history was way back in the 70s when I was working at the Missouri Historical Society. And as you may know, in St. Louis, they had the 1904 World's Fair. And at that time, there were actually still some people alive who had gone to the 1904 World's Fair. So we thought, oh, why don't we do a little oral history project? Because it was just coming into vogue at that time. A lot of social historians were starting to do oral histories. And I think we made every mistake you possibly could. But we also learned a lot from the experience. And it was a lot of fun getting to meet people who had been at such a historic event. Well, jump forward about 40 years, I guess, almost 40 years, at the Colorado State University. They have a special interest in collecting area in Hispanic history of the Southwest area, especially the political movement of the Chicano movement, which began in the 60s and I'd say probably kind of went through the mid-80s or so, where people of Hispanic and indigenous descent were trying to claim more of their civil rights, like the black, you know, the, what do I want to say? The, I want to say Black Power movement, but you know what I mean.
Civil
You
rights.
can.
Other ethnic groups that were trying to claim their civil rights and having a hard time with that. So we had some of these activists who were still very active in Pueblo. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people have heard of the farm workers movement, which was big out in California, but not too many people had heard of the movement here in Colorado, where it was also quite big. A lot of it was focused on education, so a lot of it took place up in Boulder at the University of Colorado, but Pueblo was also a hub. And so we thought, well, why don't we interview, you know, and they were pushing, we were collecting papers and photos and other materials relating to that area. And we had some people on our advisory board who really wanted us to capture interviews with folks who were aging, and we didn't know how long they were going to be around, so we did. And I would say that some of the best interviews that we did were activists interviewing other activists. Although those could get off the track occasionally because they would get to reminiscing and get off track on something else. But we got a lot of good information. It's a wonderful way to gather information that you are unlikely to find in a book or in other kinds of secondary sources. Of course, these stories are personal to the individuals, but they do have a larger implication, and taken together as a group can tell us a lot about what was going on at that time period, and especially with, you know, historic events. So anyway, I had a natural interest in oral history, and I learned that the library had these oral history tapes. And as someone, well, at the university, I not only interviewed people, I also did indexing and transcripts and all of that. Oral histories in the recorded format can be very difficult to use and to find what you're looking for, because you basically have to sit there and listen to the whole thing. So at the very least, we would try to make indexes, which is kind of the initial step with oral histories. At least that way you can see, oh, okay, at 10 minutes and 15 seconds, he's talking about XYZ. So I wanted to find a way to help the library make these tapes more accessible. So we were lucky enough to get the grant, and I do want to thank some volunteers who helped with the process of indexing, doing summaries. Now, Joyce is a veteran of the Oral History Project.
Yes.
Before I ever,
Yes, my husband
started.
did a lot of those tapes with Irene Francis, so, yes, and I did try to sit at the computer and write them out, and I still have those transcripts, but I was not familiar with how to do that.
well, she gave me copies of all of her transcripts. They're really, they follow the tapes pretty close, but they're not verbatim.
I know.
They're more like summaries, but they're
Right.
still, they're very valuable. Because, as Jenna mentioned, the tapes do degrade over time, and, you probably heard them at a time when they were in better
Yes,
shape.
and listen to the people telling their stories too.
Yes,
That was so wonderful.
yes. So anyway, Joyce Greger helped with that, and also Julie Van Lannen, who is the editor of Filter Press and does a lot of historical, she publishes books about historical Colorado topics. She also helped doing summaries and indexes. I did most of the transcripts, which if you've ever done a transcript, it can be very tedious. And as Jen mentioned, some of the recordings are not great. So whereas one interview might take you an hour to transcribe, others might take you 20 hours. I had some interviews and the length of the interviews varies a lot. I had some interviews that the transcripts were 40 pages long. So anyway, we said we would do 50 transcripts. We figured that was a reasonable amount, and I think we got most of the good ones. There are still about 100 left. Some of the tapes are in such poor shape, though, I don't know, but if anyone ever wants to do some more transcribing, we have the transcription software here at the library, and we'll be glad to teach you how to do that. And I want to say also that if you are looking and reading through these transcripts, we would very much appreciate any corrections to names, places, etc., because I am not a native of this area, and I'm sure I made lots of mistakes in mishearing things, especially with some of these old German names. They can be spelled so many different ways. So, if you see any obvious errors, I'm
Send
sure
me an email,
Jen
let
would
me
love
know.
to hear from you.
No, pretty simple for me to go in and find all the original files that Bev created, so I can go in and update them and re-upload them on our website, so.
Anyway,
Bev, step forward. You're not in the
What?
front anymore. Step forward, honey. That way.
me?
Yes, you. There you're good. You're good.
Sure you're in.
In the zone here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not just a disembodied voice.
Okay, so I think you mentioned, I did also just want to thank people who went before us in doing such great work in capturing this history, because they were not trained oral historians. They may not have done everything the exact right way that we would like it done today, but oral history as a technique was really just very new in the 60s and 70s and still evolving. And the main thing is that they captured this great stuff. So, what else do I have preliminary? Yeah, okay. These interviews, taken as a whole, I mean, the variety of people who were interviewed, mostly old settlers, people who ranched and farmed in the Wet Mountain Valley beginning in the 1870s. Really, some of these, most of the people interviewed, their own memories did not go back that far, so in a lot of cases they were telling stories that their parents had told them. So in some cases it's a little removed from the actual lived experience for those early times. Now from about 1900 on, we have a lot of first-hand accounts of people who actually lived through those periods, because in the 1960s they would have, they could have been definitely remembering back that far. So we have stories of the old German and French colonies. We have stories, one of which you'll hear an excerpt from today, from a guy who helped build the Rainbow Trail, worked for the Forest Service. We have stories from miners and miners' wives, lots of tales from school marms telling about what it was like in the one-room schoolhouses. And boy, I don't think I would have wanted to be a school marm at all out there. I wanted to, there was one interview I was really trying to find, but I just could not find it last night. But it tells the story of a school marm who, she got caught in, she was living, as a lot of the school marms did back in those days, they lived with a family. They were single women, and so they may have been taken in to live with someone who was on the Board of Education or that sort of thing. And they were sort of their host families. And she had to walk 5 miles to the school. And so she would have to get there really early, because not only would she have to bring in wood and build a fire, she'd often have to bring in water, and all that needed to be done before the kids arrived. And they would arrive on foot, they would arrive on horses, mules, whatever, but they got to school. And anyway, she was talking about one afternoon when they were struck with an early blizzard. And the weather back then, at least from the interviews I've read, was a lot more extreme than it is now. You probably heard tales from older folks in the valley. Even when I first moved here about 23 years ago, the winters were worse than they are now. I remember the year before we moved here, there was a 5-foot snowstorm that shut town down for like 3 days. So we still got a little of that extreme weather. But anyway, she sent the kids home before the weather got too bad, but she still had responsibilities and things she had to do before she could close down the schoolhouse and go home. So by the time she got done with all of that, it was, there was already a lot of snow on the ground. It was a blinding snowstorm, and she had 5 miles to walk. And she was scared. The only way she knew how to find her way home was to follow the barbed wire that ran along the road. That was the only way she even knew how to stay on the road. Well, as she walked, the weather got worse and worse. And finally she realized she just wasn't going to make it. She needed to find refuge somewhere. And she happened to see out in the field there were the haystacks from the last harvest. So she said, okay. She climbed into one of those haystacks and managed to stay warm until her host family, they of course came out looking for her when she didn't show up and the weather was so bad. And they did find her and she was rescued. But no thank you. I would not have survived that. But the people who moved here and lived in such remote circumstances, miles from any other families, they were a certain breed, and you had to be obviously really, really tough to survive. Even the women, maybe especially the women. So anyway, I have the lovely Shanna Abe, who is with the theater, who I know from the theater. She's going to read some excerpts from some of these interviews with her dramatic flair. But anyway, I'm going to introduce each one. The first one is Pauline McGregor, and Pauline McGregor was a miner's wife. She was interviewed in 1985. And most of she was a miner's wife, and her husband Archie worked in the terrible mine, which was probably a descriptive name of mines at that time. They lived in Ilse, which was one of the mining towns around here. It was a company town, so they had company housing and a schoolhouse and activities for the miners and so on. Anyway, so the terrible mine was a lead mine, and it was initially owned by the Eagle Picture Company, which I thought was fascinating. Why would a motion picture company own a lead mine? But they did, and they were in Joplin, Missouri. So after that was, it was eventually sold to R.D. Webb, and at its peak, the mine employed about 70 miners. And as I said, they had a company town, etc., etc. One of the things that she talked about several interesting things. Her husband Archie was instrumental in a couple of mine rescues, and there was a bad mine fire in 1928 at the terrible mine, and that's what I'm going to let Shanna come up and read Pauline's account of what it was like.
So there's some questions in here. I'll say the interviewer or I'll say Pauline, whichever one it is. Pauline says, well, they had a fire that started down in the mine, and it caught in the hoist room where the cable is, of course, and oil and all, and it went down into the shaft, and the timber caught a fire, and it started a big fire down there where the men didn't know about it because they were working down on it in the tunnels, and there was 14 of them in there, and I'll never forget, it was election day. And the interviewer says, oh, that was 1928. Was it 1928? Pauline says, well, it could have been because during the fire I was already married, and I know I came and got the car and took my folks to Rosita to vote. And when I came back, why, they said something had happened down in the mine, that there was a fire. Well, I went back up and got his mother to the ranch, and we came on down, and they didn't know how they were going to get the men out of there. They had a manway where they crawled, but it was caved in somehow or another, and so there was a man by the name of Bill Kelly. He volunteered to go down the ladder and notify the men that the mine was afire and that they'd have to get out. And the only way they could get out was to climb up the ladder. They had just a kind of a little place where the ladder was down from 700 feet on up. Some was way down there on 700 feet, and they had said that he went down because they couldn't ring the bell or nothing to notify these men. Got them all out of there, and they wet their coats with the water, and they had some gunny sacks, and they wet the gunny sacks and put them around them, and one at a time climbed up. And they always said that the captain went down with the ship, but the box was the first to climb on out of there, and that was a Mr. Ryan. They climb up one ladder, and then another one would go, and then I think Archie said he was about the fourth or the fifth one. They got out all safe, all right. There was all the wives and the mothers were standing there waiting, and it was a long time. It was dark before they got all out of there. And I know that all the men that were in the mine, and Archie's mother had just started through it somehow, and that Mr. Hardy that run the paper here a long time, the interviewer says, Guy U. Hardy. Pauline says, Guy U. Hardy. He helped her, and they got us a Carnegie Mellon for this Bill Kelly and $1,000. The interviewer says, aha. Pauline says, and for going down to getting the men out. Well, a lot of the men went to Westcliff for a dance at that time, and us ladies, they called the fire department from Florence and from Canyon here. But before they got here, they had a hose where they were using the water out of the water tank to keep the gallows frame in the mill. They wanted to save that if possible, so the fire department got that. And us ladies was hauling dynamite out of the storeroom to the men where they were lighting it and kicking it down the shaft to try to cave it in to save the mill, and the fire department got it and all. I'll never forget that a man by the name of McDougal, he was the boss, and R.S. Brown was the foreman there. All these here bunch that went to the dance that night, he sent them the next morning down to the office to get their checks. He fired them all. Interviewer said, oh, he did? For what reason? Pauline says, but anyhow, they just the bunch of them stayed there and cleaned up, and Doug William, they sent him a telegram, and he sent the telegram back, and it was all he said, like how many widows and orphans? Well, there was none. They were all saved. All the men were saved. So they just cleaned up around there, and he said he wouldn't open it up. And of course it was filling with water. The shaft was filling up with water. Said it would take too much to build a new shaft or to rebuild that one and all. So he just said, well, he would just close it down. Just keep a few men to clean up around there and all, and who wanted to stay there was welcome to stay there in the company houses. But of course, a lot of them didn't stay. They went looking for work somewhere else, and some of them he offered work wherever else he was. I think he was from Joplin, Missouri, I'm not so sure. The interviewer says, now you were saying then the mine was closed following that fire. Pauline says, the mine was closed.
Yeah, there was another story she told that I was trying to find where they had another mine disaster, and the men were trying to get out through the manway, and the first one found a dead body blocking the passage and had to kick it out of the way so they could go up. And later they found out that somebody had murdered this guy and thrown him down the shaft. And somebody eventually was convicted for that. But wild times back in Westcliff. Now let's see here. My next interview I was going to talk about was Archie Hess. And Archie was interviewed in 1967, so he was one of the earliest interviews. And he was a longtime resident of Custer County, and he shared his experiences working for the U.S. Forest Service, developing the Rainbow Trail. Let's see. Hess emphasized the importance of conservation and proper trail maintenance, noting how early crews strategically designed the trails to prevent erosion. and to ensure longevity. So I think I'll have Shannon come up and read his account of how they worked on the trail.
Archie says, I came here to build the Rainbow Trail, which is a trail that runs from near Salida to Music Pass and just parallels the lane just on forest land and its horse and footpath, of course. We worked the crew on that from 4 to as much as 8 men at times. We hired them and worked them in pairs, 2 men that could get along together and like the same grub, and no such thing as a sleeping bag. They hadn't been heard of. So the pair would work together and eat together and sleep together, and it made things more harmonious around the camp to work them in that way. So we'd move our camp, maybe 2 miles beyond the end of the trail to where it had been completed, and then work back to where we connect up to the trail and work ahead, a couple of miles, and then move our camp. That way, we completed the Rainbow Trail during the years of 1926 and 1927. In the spring, before time to go to work, Roy Truman at the time was our ranger, and he would say, well, get things ready, Arch, you and your men and your tools and everything, and generally before you could get in the mountains, really, because it took some time to get everything together. Anyhow, I'd finally get my crew from 2 to sometimes as much as 8 men. Well, we'd go up and camp on some creek, a good camping place where a little water and generally some trout, if we could find that kind of a stream, of course. Well, then I'd take a hold of one man, a guy I liked pretty well, a buddy of mine, and we'd start out ahead and survey our routes. Well, I was given on the map the limits of the deeded land and the boundaries of the forest, and we stuck to this from the ranger, who was really supposed to be doing the laying out, but for me to do the work on the laying out. Well, we'd go ahead and we'd survey ahead a route, and that was allowed a maximum of a 15% grade going across a draw or over a hump. Well, me and my buddy, we'd survey ahead, and the men that come from behind us and the tools needed were an axe, saw, and dynamite for blowing up stumps and rocks, and a thick bar. And the most universal tool, the main tool you really couldn't get along without, was a grubbing hoe. We called them a hoe daddy. It was just a one-bladed grubbing hoe. With them, we did most of the work, just hoeing it out and level that trail, about 16 to 20 inches wide and level, and keeping it within our 15% grade, softening up the timber so that when you stand clear in the middle of the trail, you couldn't reach a tree on either side. Something like 6 feet clear, you see.
Hard work.
Yeah.
I remember later on in the interview, I think Arlie Riggs was the person who was interviewing him. She said, gee, it sure would have been. There at one time there was a proposal raised that they build a road up there that paralleled the Rainbow Trail. Well, I'm really glad that never happened. I can't even imagine cars on the Rainbow Trail. But she thought it was a great idea and would promote tourism, and but it never happened, thank goodness. So the last excerpt that I have for you today is a little bit different. This fellow's name was Rex Clift, and Rex was quite a character, shall we say. He was born October 12th, 1904 in Rosita, in an area called Hungry Gulch. It was just past where the schoolhouse used to be, and his father was a miner who drilled holes, shot dynamite, loaded cars, and did other work as well. He worked mostly for the Bassick, the Yellow, and the Carita mines. And after Rex was born, they moved down into Carita. So Rex went to the Carita school through 3rd grade, where he said he mostly learned to be ornery. One time, he tells a story about putting a chipmunk in the teacher's desk, and then when she opened the desk drawer, the chipmunk jumped out at her, and she tipped over backwards, went head over heels so that her dress went over her head, and gave everybody a show. And well, of course, he thought that was hilarious. But let's see. In 1929, he did a lot of odd jobs, but most of what he wound up doing was grazing sheep and raised some crops like lettuce and peas and so on. And he must also have raised some corn. So Shanna's gonna tell you a little bit about what else Rex Clift was up to.
No good.
Just a little slower.
Oh, sure, sorry about that. The interviewer says, "Who made bootleg?" And Rex said, "I did," and he starts laughing. An unidentified speaker says, "He's still got his still, but it's all in different pieces." The interviewer says, "You made your own? What'd you make it out of?" And Rex says, "It was pure corn. It was made out of sugar, just pure corn whiskey. I'll tell you a good one. I had a banker down there in Canyon. Oh, he was good for about a gallon a week. And I took him a gallon one day, and he took a taste of it. 'My God,' he said, 'that's kind of raw, ain't it?' 'Well,' I said, 'it's probably a month or 2 months old.' 'Oh, that's just awful,' he said. 'Well,' I said, I've got another gallon out there that I brought down for another guy that's 5 years old.' I said, 'It'll cost you more money.' I was getting $10 a gallon for it then, and I said, 'It'll cost you 14 for that gallon.' He said, 'Bring it in here, let me see it.' So I went out, drove around for a little while, my younger brother and I, Clinton, and we put some more coloring in it and made it look a little darker, and I drove back in and said, 'Well,' he said, 'that's more like it.'" So, there you have it. One of our less reputable characters, but that's just a sampling of the stories that you can find in online. So I encourage you to go and investigate and enjoy yourself. And I think it's fun to especially listen to the interviews while you're looking at the transcript, because it helps sometimes with being able to understand it. So that's all I've got. Any questions?
The first story you read about the fire, I missed the part. Where exactly was that?
In Ilse, it was the terrible mine.
I know, but where?
In Ilse?
It's up Oak Creek
That's
Grade,
Bear
isn't it?
Base. No, Bear Base,
Oh,
east of
oh.
Bear, the east side of Bear Base.
Oh, okay.
There's nothing left.
Just trying to
No,
I don't think so.
but there is a sign that says Ilse Camp,
Yeah.
when
it's
you
a
go
sign.
over 271,
Yes,
it's
okay.
on the east side.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, you never know it was.
Yeah, it used to be
Thank you.
town.
I remember now.
The terrible.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's still a ranch entrance that says Ilse Camp.
You know, I think mine was.
Yeah.
Bev, there's a question for you.
Yeah.
I know, Bev, I'm back here. I have a question for one of you. Is this project ongoing? And what would one do if somebody offered an oral history that was a person that you thought might have interesting historical information, which has happened to me 3 times over the summer working the museum. And I don't know whether they've done it or not. They've told me they haven't. But all of a sudden someone's telling you stories from their grandparents or parents from, the 1800s and 1900s, and you're thinking, wow, this should be documented, or this should be written down, or, an oral historian should maybe contact them. Like, is there any process or anything that we're doing to move this forward, to continue with collecting these as they come our way?
You want to answer that, Jenna?
Yeah, we've talked about it. We would like to restart this project. We haven't taken the steps to actually do that yet, mostly just because my day-to-day schedule is a little busy. But there are kits we can borrow from the state library that has all the equipment needed in order to conduct an oral history interview. And then we would have a good quality audio file. There's trainings available. Bev obviously is very skilled in this department and has offered in the past to hold some kind of training or answer questions if people want to conduct these interviews. So definitely something we're interested in. If you have specific people in mind or people who are approaching you, we can definitely try to, you know, move forward with that. Yeah, we definitely would be interested in adding new interviews.
Yeah,
to
I
the
just wanna
collection, so.
snag them, you know, like the one, no, I'm terrible with names. She said, well, Irene wrote most of that down, but Irene didn't get all of it, I have a lot more to say. And I just thought, well, hey, wait, let me get, you know, what is it? So there's kind of interesting things still out there.
And another thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then people get off on their own little tangents.
That's really kind of inspiring, thank you.
Winter project, sitting in the library and learning about our local history.